Hey, hello everybody. Welcome back to F330. This is YouTube session number 10 for Monday, April 27, as we enter into week 14. Week 14, the final week of our semester together. We take up the second round of our theme over the last couple of weeks, perspectives. Last week we were in the Sibundoy Valley of Colombia, a place very dear to my heart. This week we take a different turn altogether. We take a turn into a literature that is outside of the folkloristic and the ethnomusicology literature. We're really heading now into something that has to do with resource management and conservation strategies and so forth. So in a way, when we did performing interventions, we had folklorists and ethnomusicologists kind of working from our foundation and looking outwards to connect with some other kinds of projects. But this week, we're actually looking at people who are operating outside of our domain, but are kind of looking to us, looking to our kind of material to actually enrich and increase the efficacy of the work that they're doing. So that's kind of what we're up to. We'll come down in a moment to some of those features, but I want to definitely get into some old business, as it were, and of course I'll be taking a look at your thought pieces number 11, which are arriving probably as you're looking at this video, if you haven't already sent them in, so thought piece 11, and I'm definitely looking forward to see what it was about one of those pieces that I wrote that struck you, and also what great advice you might have for me about how I could expand and develop those pieces a little bit. So that's coming. But I want to spend a little bit of time in this session on the final original research project, which I realized we could have been calling FORP all the time. Final original research project. If we can have a cat pig, why can't we have a FORP? But anyway, all joking aside, this is serious business. So the final original research project, the two products from that work are coming up in terms of due dates. As you will no doubt remember, the flash vision, the presentation, the 5-minute flash vision, those are due this coming Friday. So actually at the end of this week, Friday, I need to have those from you. And remember, those can come in the form of a PowerPoint that you would put together that you could have used in a classroom presentation. Or you might actually perform your presentation and have some friendly person like Pat. Hi, Pat.
Hi.
Hold the camera or however you do this and send me that documentary of your presentation. So that's coming up, due at the end of this week. And then next Wednesday, a week from this coming Wednesday, that'll be the final due date for your final papers. Now the guidelines, they've been around for a while and you know about them. I'd like you to go back and look at them and be sure that you at least take them into account. I understand you might come up with your own way of formulating how to do this, but definitely keep those guidelines in mind. They're pretty explicit and detailed. The basic idea is I can see really two kinds of projects here. We've talked about this before, but it probably won't hurt for me to pull a couple of these ideas together. I can see a project that has a kind of an exploratory approach to, here's a particular community that has a certain kind of relationship to their local ecology, which is realized in maybe some of their cosmology. Remember, we talked a lot about cosmology, or in some ritual practices. You want to get into that folklore side of things, that performing of culture. So I could see that, or as we've talked about, and as we've seen in a number of our readings and so forth, and in my own work, you might be looking at a situation where a community has come into some kind of conflict with some sort of outside external pressure, and you can see how they are drawing on traditional folklore and expressive culture forms to resist or to deal with that situation. So it could be, could go off in those different kinds of directions. But anyway, I'm definitely looking forward to see how this project comes into culmination after all this talk and all of this preparation that's gone into it over the weeks really that we've been talking to one another. Well, let me get back to some. Let's pick up some new business now. That is, let's get into the topic for this week, and in particular to say a little bit here about the interesting and somewhat dense reading by Bas Verschuren, who is a scholar, a young scholar from the Netherlands. He teaches over there in the Netherlands at a university. And I just want to bring out a few points that might be worth focusing on, or at least bring these to your attention. They seemed interesting to me. Notice that he starts with a poem by an indigenous person. It's actually a Native American poet from the Wintu people who are up in Northern California, around Sacramento, up in that area in California. And he's an interesting fellow. I just want to pause and say a little bit about this guy. So he goes by the name of Tahindauli, but his name is Frank LaPena. He's a Native American from this Wintu community. He's a painter, a printmaker, a photographer, writer, educator, traditional dancer, and poet. So this is one of these amazing people who comes out of a traditional community and really becomes a kind of an ambassador, but very much inspired by the art forms and the performance forms and the folklore of the community that he comes from. So he's been quite a representative, not only of his own community there, but more broadly of Native American perspectives here in the United States. He was born in 1937, so he's been around a while, but as far as I can tell, he's still among the living. And we start with this poem that in the article for Monday, which really has a sort of cosmic and mythological perspectives in it. I am related in a universe bigger than my mind. I travel both earth and heaven, trails lost in reference to other lives, to other stars and songs of other constellations. And it's interesting that this article that we read for today opens with this kind of invocation, taking us into a cosmovision, and that's very much what Bas wants to do here. You know, his work is very much grounded in the international conventions and protocols coming out of the United Nations, coming out of WIPO, the intellectual property group there, and so he brings to the surface this really very impressive network of thinking and coordinating that's been done over the years, over the last couple of decades in particular, where policymakers and people involved in resource management and really a wide variety of actors have come together to try to hash out some procedures and some concerns, some considerations when we think about how we're going to deal with our natural environment. So he's very much grounded in those conventions, and they come up a lot in the paper. But you can see what he's actually trying to do is to make a connection from sort of environmental science to the kind of things that we're doing. So he's very much trying to reach out in our direction and help the people that he works with understand the importance of culture, language, local knowledge, folklore belief systems, and folklore performance forms. He wants to bring more awareness of this whole cultural dimension to these conversations that are going on in those who work in resource management. So he's trying to translate across these kinds of barriers, and he takes note that people have been fairly quick to recognize the validity of traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, traditional ecological knowledge. People have been accepting of that, but it's hard. It's a harder case. It's harder for scientists and for policy people who are very much engaged in metrics. It's harder for them to bring cultural features into their calculations, and so he's trying to help make this kind of a connection. One of the things that he talks about are SNSs, okay, sacred natural sites. and he sees these as a very promising site where we can bring a lot of different parties together, because in sacred natural sites you have, of course, the cultural values where people, local people, maybe tribal or indigenous people, see that these sites really embody something important about their heritage. But there are often also sites where there's an ecological conservation that goes on as well. So a lot of things come together, and so he does emphasize these sacred natural sites. And I imagine a few of you will be, talking and writing about a sacred natural site in your FORP, in your final original research project. He comes very close to really talking about folklore, even though he doesn't. I don't think the word folklore comes up very much, if at all, in his piece. But remember, midway or a little further than that through his article, he lists actually a set of what he calls socio-cultural values, and when he means these are values that all the policymakers really need to take into account and become more aware of when they work out schemes as to how certain kinds of resources, how certain regions will be managed. And that list was quite interesting. 1, oral traditions and expressions, including language as a vehicle of the intangible. Does that sound familiar to the folklorist? Oral tradition, yes, it does. Secondly, cultural heritage. 3rd, performing arts, once again taking us into this realm of traditional performance. Social practices, this is the 4th one. Rituals and festive events. 5, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. And 6, traditional craftsmanship. I mean, this is kind of an inventory of folklore forms that are found in communities all across the world. So you can see that Bass, and I'm going to refer to him by his first name, which is more accessible to me than his last name. But Bass is coming out of the environmental sciences, but you can see that he's really coming very close to talking about and becoming interested in the things that are actually of primary concern to us as folklorists and ethnomusicologists. So, we're trying to build a bridge, or a number of bridges to connect, worlds of thinking that sometimes seem to be very independent of each other, but really need to be co-articulated so we can think more effectively about, how to deal with this impending crisis of climate change. He comes down to, at one point, it's kind of interesting, the 3 Ps. He's got people, planet, and profit, so people mean the cultural factors that he's interested in here. Planet being the ecological factors, and profit being the economic factors, and somehow to find a balance or some way of working these 3 things together so that we come up with a result that is in the best interests of as many people as possible. Well, those are some of the pieces that I pick out from the really interesting work by Bass, this young environmental scientist, sociologist, working in the Netherlands. He just got his PhD in 2017, so he's a pretty new face on the scene, but I think he has something valuable to do here, and that is to help connect some of these discourses so that we can think more creatively and more effectively about problems that are affecting us. Okay, people, well, I think I'm going to let it go here, only to say that, yes, now's the time to get very serious about your FORP, your final original research project. So, and really, if you have any questions as you size it up and begin to commit to a pathway where you feel my input could be valuable, feel free to drop me a line. I think I gave you, access to, we could even do a FaceTime chat if that would be useful. But yeah, now's the time, of course, to get very serious about those. And I'll be back to you on Wednesday, and we'll be wrapping up this last week of the semester, and I'll have some more things to say. Another interesting article coming up, again, in this domain of environmental science, but trying to make connections and opening up pathways so that folklorists and ethnomusicologists can talk to and be with and make common cause with people working in some of these more technical or policy-oriented fields. Okay, well, that's it for today. So long, everybody.